My grandmother's will altered my life in a way I could never have predicted. While my cousins walked away with slices of an $8.5 million New York estate, all I received was an old, threadbare coat. In that lawyer's office, they laughed openly. Dorian leaned back in his chair with a smirk, asking if I planned to pawn it for spare change. I made sure her whisper carried, suggesting it suited someone who'd always lived like a stray. I gripped the coat, trying to hide the sting of humiliation. Every gaze was fixed on me, waiting to see if I would crack. My Uncle Victor offered me that familiar thin smile, the one that always implied I didn't belong. For a fleeting moment, I considered tossing the coat in the nearest trash bin as I left. But something about it, folded with care by my grandmother's hands, made me pause. It felt less like clothing and more like a message meant only for me. Back home, my fingers traced the lining until I found it, a stiff ridge, out of place. With a quick cut from a pair of scissors, a sealed envelope slipped to the floor. My chest constricted. As I unfolded the letter inside, my hands trembled so violently I almost dropped it. When I stepped out of that Manhattan office clutching the coat, I felt stripped of every ounce of dignity. The gleaming marble floors, the golden light from the chandeliers, the faint trace of expensive cologne. These belonged to my cousin's world, not mine. I was the forgotten grandson, excluded from the Grant fortune. My name is Elias Grant, 32 years old. Money has never been an ally to me. I work in a small independent bookstore in Albany, surrounded by shelves of novels and poems that gather dust faster than they sell. My paycheck barely covers rent on my one-bedroom apartment. Groceries are always a stretch, and the same question lingers in my mind. What would life have looked like if my grandmother's affection had come with her fortune? Henrietta Grant, my grandmother, was the center of my childhood. She never judged by wealth, but by honesty, kindness, and how one behaved when no one else was looking. After my mother, Lenora, died when I was 10, Henrietta kept me anchored. She taught me to stir soup while sharing stories of her own Depression-era childhood, reminding me that true strength came not from loudness but from quiet perseverance. Victor, my uncle, never saw me through her eyes. He married into the family after my mother's death and from the beginning treated me as though I were trespassing in a life I didn't deserve. Ruthless in business, harsh in judgment, he molded his children in his image. Dorian grew arrogant with ease, and thus honed cruelty into an art. They lived in penthouses and wore tailored suits, while I learned the careful arithmetic of stretching a dollar. That day in the office, the gulf between us felt wider than ever. The estate, valued at $8.5 million, was neatly divided between Dorian and ISA. Their shared glance was triumphant, like runners celebrating a victory in a race I was never even allowed to join. My name appeared once, attached not to property or accounts, but to a single heirloom coat, worded as if it were a token prize. When it was carried forward in white tissue paper, I already felt the sting. Dorian chuckled, shaking his head. All those years, and this is what you get. His tone carried amusement laced with cruelty. ISA leaned close enough for her whisper to cut. I guess charity cases don't need trust funds. Victor's silence was worse than words. Arms crossed, satisfied, making the moment permanent. I wanted to say something, to declare that I didn't need their wealth, that my grandmother's love outweighed any inheritance. But the words stuck in my throat. Shame pressed down on me until I could hardly breathe. So I stood, thanked the lawyer with a trembling voice, and walked out clutching the coat. Outside, Manhattan pulsed with life. Taxis blaring, steam curling up from subway grates, people in fine jackets hurrying past. I was invisible among them, carrying what everyone inside that office had dismissed as worthless. The coat was frayed at the cuffs, its seams worn thin, one pocket patched over and over. Yet to me, it carried the memory of winter nights when my grandmother draped it around my shoulders as I ate soup at her kitchen table. It still carried the faint scent of cedar, like her home always had. I kept asking myself why she had done it. She knew my struggles. She knew how hard I worked to get by. She knew Victor and his children treated me like an outsider. Was this her last reminder that I'd never be part of their world of privilege? Or was it her way of teaching me, one final time, that love isn't measured in money? By the time I returned to my apartment, humiliation had turned to anger. I tossed the coat onto the couch, pacing as Dorian's voice echoed in my head. All those years, and this is what you get. I wanted to call someone to vent the bitterness burning inside me, but there was no one. Friends at the bookstore wouldn't understand. Relatives outside Henrietta's circle had long since drifted away. The silence in my apartment was heavier than their laughter. Eventually, I sat down, staring at the coat in the dim lamplight. Every crease, every stitch, every worn thread glowed under the weak light. And I thought of her hands, folding it, tucking it in tissue paper, making sure it would reach me. My chest tightened. Maybe she meant for me to remember her not with money, but with the warmth she always gave. Still, the sting from that office lingered. I almost threw the coat away, until my fingers found something hard under the lining. I traced the seam, and for the first time that day, a small spark of hope lit up. The rigid line haunted me all night. I'd felt it with my fingertips, but was too exhausted and ashamed to cut it open then. I lay awake on the sagging couch, replaying the scene. Their laughter clung to me like smoke. I pictured them celebrating somewhere high above the city, toasting with champagne over the millions that fell into their laps. Meanwhile, I sat alone under a shabby lamp with peeling paint on the walls, clutching a coat that seemed to announce how I'd been relegated, forgotten, and insignificant. My morning humiliation had hardened into anger. I pulled on my jacket, shoved the coat under my arm, and went to the corner diner for breakfast. The bell jingled when I came in, and I slid into a booth, the coat pressed to my side. Mara, the waitress who knew I couldn't splurge, set down coffee without asking and glanced at the bundle. "New coat?" she asked. "Old one." "My grandmother's," I replied. Mara smiled, meaning well. "Then it's worth more than any new one." Her kindness stung, though. Worth more felt like another slight evidence I'd been dismissed while my cousins had the last laugh. My uncle's satisfied smirk replayed in my head. He had engineered this outcome, kept me always outside. The fight wasn't only with them, it was inside me. Part of me wanted the coat as a relic of my grandmother's affection. Another part wanted to burn it to erase the shame tied to it. I couldn't decide. After breakfast, I walked the city with the coat folded in my arms. The autumn air bit my face as I passed shop windows filled with suits, couples and restaurants, cars I'd never owned. Each reflection returned the same image, a man carrying a remnant of someone else's life. At the subway entrance, I stopped by a trash bin, staring at it with the coat in hand. Tossing it in would end it. I could return to the bookstore and bury the memory. For a moment, the thought felt liberating. Then my fingers brushed that lining again. The hard ridge was unmistakable. It hadn't been there when my grandmother wore the coat. She'd added something. Why? The idea hooked me. I kept the coat and rode the train back to Albany, the coat spread across my lap through a crowded car. My grandmother had wrapped it carefully in tissue and folded it with care. She ensured it reached me whole. That thought shifted something. Maybe this wasn't rejection. Maybe it was something else. But doubt whispered, what if it was nothing? What if I cut it open and found only scraps or air, and every last hope vanished? By the time I reached my apartment, I was torn. I dropped the coat on the couch and paced, heart pounding as my cousin's voices echoed. Dorian's laugh, Say's hiss, Victor's approving silence. They had humiliated me publicly and left me to carry that shame. I stared at the coat, heavy with meaning. Ignore it and the question would gnaw forever. Open it and risk ruin. That night I dreamed of my grandmother's kitchen, 10 years old again, watching her stir soup. In the dream, she looked at me and said, "Elias, you cannot let them tell you who you are. You must find out for yourself." I woke crying and the next morning made a choice. I set the coat on the table, cleared space, and took scissors. My hands shook as I eased the blade under the seam. Each cut sent threads snapping like tiny whispers. When the last stitch gave, my fingers slipped in and found a ridge. I seized it and pulled out a small envelope, yellowed with age and tightly sealed. I stared at it, breath shallow, feeling the weight of everything pressed down. This was it, whatever she'd hidden. The envelope was fragile, but felt heavier than its size. I thought about leaving it closed, tucking it away where hope could remain untested. But hope tangled with fear gnaws at you. I pictured Dorian's smirk, ASA's sharp words, Uncle Victor's satisfied silence. They believed I'd been cast aside. I tightened my jaw. I wouldn't carry that shame forever. If she left me a message, I needed to know, even if it broke me. I splashed cold water on my face and told myself I had nothing left to lose. Returning to the table, I slid a knife beneath the envelope's seal. The paper tore with a faint crack, releasing the dry, cedar-scented smell of old ink. My hands trembled as I unfolded the letter. The paper was thin, the handwriting unsteady with age but deliberate. Before reading, memories rushed in. Her laughter in the garden, her steady hands guiding mine as we kneaded dough, her late-night stories that chased away fear. She'd been more than a grandmother. She'd been my shelter and my parent. Could this letter reveal she'd seen me as less than the others all along? The fear almost made me put the envelope back and hide it away. Then my grandmother's voice came to me, calm and steady. Elias, truth is never your enemy. I began to read. The first line stopped me cold. My dearest Elias, if you are holding this letter, then you are the one I trusted most. I froze, breath shallow. The words weren't rejection, they were an act of trust. She wrote about the estate and how Victor and his children worshipped appearances. She explained that leaving them the visible fortune had been intentional, a test to see what they would do with easy wealth. She expected greed to consume them. She wanted me kept far from that ruin. Then she revealed something that made my heart pound louder than the street noise. She had assets she'd never folded into the public estate, bank accounts, properties, and investments kept separate and secured under my name. The letter contained instructions for accessing them. I let the paper fall onto the table, overwhelmed. For years, I'd believed I was forgotten and unworthy. Here, in her own hand, was proof I'd been trusted above all. The coat, seams torn where I'd cut it open, no longer felt like a useless rag. It felt chosen, a deliberate vessel for what she'd hidden. She'd known Victor would ignore it, Dorian and Say would mock and discard it, but she also knew I'd hesitate and eventually find what she stowed away. I paced, clutching the letter, asking why she'd chosen me. Did she know how small and unready I felt? Then I remembered the nights she told me I was stronger than I believed. She had believed in me before I believed in myself. Fear pressed at me. If this was real, my life had changed overnight. Could I handle that kind of money? Would it change who I was? The questions chilled me, but I kept reading until the last lines. Elias, wealth reveals the truth in people. That is why I give it to you. You cared for me when no one else did. You never saw me as a bank. You have the heart to carry this. Promise me you will not let them break you. Promise me you will remember who you are. Tears blurred the ink. I pressed the page to my chest and whispered, I promise. Decision made, I slipped the letter back into its envelope and tucked it back into the coat's inner pocket. The coat had become a key, a bridge from shame to something like redemption. I slept with the letter against my chest and woke steadier. Over coffee, I studied the instructions again. My grandmother had set up a separate trust in my name and left the attorney's contact. My hand shook as I dialed. A calm voice answered, Office of Samuel Wright. I identified myself and mentioned Henrietta Grant. There was a pause, then, Mr. Grant, I've been expecting this call. Come in today. The office was modest, a brick building, nothing like the marble tower where Victor's family had celebrated. Samuel Wright was an older, kind-eyed man who opened a folder and slid toward me. Your grandmother was deliberate, he said. She wanted to protect you and have you carry her legacy. My hands trembled as I read deeds, account statements, and investment summaries. Properties in Manhattan and Brooklyn, a farmhouse upstate, long-standing investment accounts. The totals were far beyond the $8.5 million fought over in that will. My breath caught. This can't be right, I whispered. It is right, Samuel replied gently. She built this quietly and named you the steward of it. She figured the others would squander what they'd been given. She believed you would build. Staring at those pages, the humiliation and loneliness from a will reading started to peel away, replaced by a fragile vindication. Dorian's laugh, Say's snide remarks, Victor's satisfied silence. None of it held the same power. They had celebrated the wrong thing while my grandmother entrusted me with her real legacy. When I left the office, the city felt different, the same taxis, crowds, and cold wind, but I walked with my head higher. A few days later, Dorian and ISA invited me to dinner, a gilded place meant for gloating. I showed up wearing the same patched coat, now neatly mended where I'd cut it, the envelope still tucked inside the pocket like a pulse. Dorian leaned back with that same sneer. Still clinging to that thing. Maybe if you polish it, someone will call it vintage, he mocked. ISA laughed and added the old barb about joining them in Paris if I'd gotten something real from Grandma. But inside me, everything had already shifted. Instead, you're stuck in Albany with that rag. Their voices no longer pierced me. I smiled, calm and steady. You're right, I said. All I have is this coat. But sometimes the things people overlook are worth more than they realize. They scoffed, rolling their eyes, already dismissing me. That was fine. Let them. They didn't know what I carried in my pocket, and they never would. On the train home, I pulled the letter out and read it again. My grandmother's words steadied me. You have the heart to carry this. The truth was, she had given me more than money. She had given me back my sense of worth. She had reminded me that the world does not decide who you are. The people who love you, who truly see you, are the ones who define your place. Back in my apartment, I hung the coat carefully in the closet. I touched the fabric one last time and whispered, "Thank you, Grandma." That night, I lay in bed wide awake, not from fear, but from possibility. My grandmother's trust meant I had the chance to shape a future that did not look like the cold arrogance of Victor or the greedy laughter of Dorian and Isa. I had the chance to build something better, something lasting, something she would be proud of. The humiliation of that while reading had nearly broken me, but it was the beginning of a truth I could never have imagined. In that cracked office, when the lawyer handed me a torn coat while everyone else celebrated millions, I thought I had lost everything. Now I understood I had been given everything that mattered. The power of that realization swept through me like a tide. My grandmother had not left me behind. She had chosen me. And with that choice, she had given me the chance to rise above the people who tried to keep me small. The days that followed were unlike anything I had ever experienced. For the first time, I did not wake to the sound of my alarm, dreading another long day of shelving books while my paycheck slipped through my fingers before the month was over. Instead, I woke with a letter that gave me a new sense of purpose. My grandmother's words echoed in me every morning. She had trusted me. She had seen me not as the forgotten one, not as the burden Victor always called me, but as the only one strong enough to carry her true legacy. At first, I told no one. The weight of what she had left me was too great to reveal. The money, the properties, the accounts, it was overwhelming. But even more overwhelming was the responsibility. I thought about my grandmother's kitchen, the way she taught me that strength was not measured by how much you had, but by how you treated others when you had it. I knew I could not let her down. Victor, Dorian, and Isa continued flaunting their inheritance. They posted pictures online of trips to Paris, parties and penthouses, shopping sprees with designer bags piled high. To them, the estate was proof of their worth, a trophy to wave in the faces of others. Yet behind their polished smiles, I could already see the cracks. Dorian's arrogance grew louder. Isa's tone became more desperate, as if she feared losing her grip on the lifestyle she had been handed. Months later, I learned that their millions were shrinking fast. Investments were squandered on bad deals. Luxury became a hungry beast that devoured everything they owned. By the end of the year, they were still living in expensive apartments, but whispers of debt followed them. Then, one evening, as snow began to fall outside my apartment, I received a call. It was Isa. Her voice, usually sharp and confident, trembled. "Elias," she said, "can we talk? Maybe over dinner." I could hear the strain she tried to hide. For years, she had mocked me, laughed at me, treated me as if I were beneath her. Now she reached out, not with laughter, but with desperation. Dorian followed days later with a message full of forced friendliness, asking if I wanted to catch up. I knew what they wanted. They had begun to sense the truth. I met them once more in the same restaurant where they had mocked me for wearing the coat. Dorian's suit looked sharper than ever, but his eyes darted nervously when he spoke. Isa kept her voice sweet, but her hands twisted the napkin in her lap. They circled the subject, probing without directly begging. I listened calm and steady, sipping water as though I had all the time in the world. When the moment came, I leaned forward. "You mocked me when all I had was this coat. You laughed when I walked out of that office. And yet this coat carried something you could never buy. Her trust. I don't need to prove that to you, but I will never forget how you treated me when you thought I had nothing." They fell silent, their arrogance deflating like a balloon pricked with a pin. For once, they had no words. I left them there, not with anger, but with clarity. I no longer needed their approval. I no longer carried their mockery like a wound. My grandmother had healed at the moment she entrusted me with her secret. In the months that followed, I began to put her legacy to use. I restored the farmhouse she had left upstate, turning it into a community center for children who had grown up the way I had, lonely, overlooked, uncertain of their worth. I funded scholarships for students who could not afford college but had the determination to push forward. I built something that honored her, something that reflected the heart she had always given me. The coat still hangs in my closet. I do not wear it often, but sometimes on quiet nights I take it out, trace the stitches I cut open, and hold it close. It reminds me of where I began. It reminds me that even when the world laughs, even when family betrays you, love has a way of breaking through. The lesson my grandmother gave me is one I will carry forever. Money reveals who people are. Some will waste it, some will worship it, and a rare few will use it to build. She trusted me to be one of the few. And in her trust, I found my strength.